Hello and welcome to Your HR Career Podcast. Little bit different this one because somebody's interviewing me. So I'm going to hand over to Jen Potter and let's see where she takes things. Over to you, Jen.
Well, what a privilege for me that we get to swap places and now I get to ask you the questions.
No pressure.
Looking forward to this, Jane. So let's start right at the beginning. Take us back to the beginning. What was your first HR job and why?
Why HR? So I graduated in 94 in Sheffield into a useless but wonderful American Studies Arts degree. And Meadowhall had just sort of excavated the soul out of Sheffield and there were basically no jobs. It was just horror. It was like something from the 1970s. And my sister was living in Leeds and Leeds seemed to be up and coming. So I came to Leeds one Friday and threw my CV around a gazillion agencies and I had about 3 job offers for the next week. So I thought, well, Leeds has got more going on than Sheffield because I tried really hard to get a decent job after university in Sheffield. So I thought, fine, I'll move to Leeds. So I moved to Leeds and my sister had a room free in a house she was renting. So, and my first foray in Leeds was general kind of office admin, but I liked it. And I eventually ended up, and I can't even remember how, I'm guessing through some kind of temping agency, Reed or somebody like that at the time. And I ended up at Grant Thornton, which was a tiny little accountancy at the time, not kind of the global mega beast that it is now. And bizarrely, they had a management consultancy department with HR consultants in it. And it's funny because I think about it now and I think it was just a pure fluke that I ended up there. And they were doing a whole load of weird things. There was one gang of people who kept going to Dubai and they were building org structures and job descriptions for sheikhs who were designing these new hotels that were going up. You know, this is 1995. There was another bunch who worked for Network Rail who were doing kind of proper project management stuff, you know, print technology, you know, all that kind of jazz. And then there was another group who were doing kind of training and development, leadership development, really, but in its very early embryonic stage. And that gave me a taste of HR. And whilst I was there, I started doing my CIPD, which I really enjoyed. 6 months into that job, they made the entire team redundant, including me, because they focused on accountancy and got rid of all the extras. So it was quite funny. The managing partner at the time called me into his office and he said, oh, I've looked at your CV, Jane, and you didn't do too badly, did you? It's a 2-1 from Sheffield, people. Not badly, thank you. It wasn't an A from Oxbridge. And he said, have you ever thought about career as an accountant? Because, you know, we're going to make your role redundant. So, you know, but you seem like a good sort. So if you fancy staying on. And it took me probably about an 1/8 of a second to know that A, I'm really not that great with numbers. Number 2, I couldn't think of anything more boring than being an accountant. Sorry, accountants, it's just not me. And 3, I'm sure there was better places than this. So I said no in a nanosecond and left. But that planted a little thought, like maybe this is the thing. I then went off and worked as a recruitment consultant. I then worked as an event manager. And then I ended up back out of work again, but temping at the hospital. And I had this amazing guy that I was working for who was a pediatric urologist. And he said, basically, do all this stuff for me. And anytime you've got left, you can look for work and I'll pay you. He was great.
Oh, what a good
so, yeah, he was terrific. So this long, hot summer, as I remember it was probably 1997, I think. I spent time researching what jobs were out there. And I kept circling back to HR. And I thought, this is the right one for me. This is it. So I looked really hard in the Leeds market and I ended up getting an HR administrator job. And I went down quite a lot in terms of salary, HR administrator at Eversheds. And it was their first HR team. There was one HR person there. We all sat with the facilities director and climbed over carpet and tile samples every day to get into the office. And it was just the start of HR. And I just got there at the right time for me. And also it was at the time where HR was growing. So I kind of got in there. They were paying for me to do my professional qualification and I was learning. So that was kind of where it all started.
And in those early days of HR, what was the biggest lesson that you learned?
But I think that the toughest thing really was to guide instead of do. And that probably took me 10 years of HR to properly learn, because lawyers don't really want to do people management because they've got more important things to do that involve billing clients thousands of pounds. So, and culturally, law firms at that stage were not really investing in people in the way that they do now. So the woman from HR will do it, was kind of the thing. And to resist that whilst not doing yourself out of a job, or kind of trying to do it whilst getting respect and building respect, was really difficult. I'm not sure whether I managed it particularly well, but it was kind of, that was the job, that was the challenge. Yeah,
because in that circumstances, the easier path will be to just get on and do, right? Not necessarily the best path, but the easiest path in some ways would be to just get on and do. Like, it's harder to go, it would be better all around for everybody.
Yeah, and I think absolutely. And I think the HR function at the time, we were given guidance internally within ourselves that our job was to transform, so that we couldn't keep doing, because that's the way it had always been done. We actually needed to lean a bit. And yeah, and if we weren't getting a bit of flack back, we probably weren't pushing quite hard enough. So there was certainly, and I had the most fantastic manager, Anna Patra, who I'm actually interviewing on this podcast series, who's still the best manager I've ever had. And we had an HR director, a lady called Caroline Wilson, who was also totally inspirational. And they were leading it was almost like every week the HR function grew. But they, between them, I was guided by both of them around what we were setting out to do, and we were setting out to change the culture. That was absolutely the case in many law firms and other professional services at that time. It was right on that point of, we were coming through a recession, about to go into another one. Things needed to be done differently. So we kind of had this this encouragement or license to change and to challenge. Yeah, which is, for me, it was right place, right time.
It's like the contract was really clear. You had a really clear contract and a mission that everyone had bought into. So that almost like gives you a bit of permission to break the mold somewhat more easily. Suggesting it's easy.
Exactly. The top layer, you know, the senior partners, the management team, the equivalent of the board in a law firm, they had bought into the cost-cutting change push agenda. It was kind of, as always, the mid-level lawyers were the ones who got the squeeze. So it was challenging, but it wasn't without support. We had senior support. It was just a kind of painful process for everyone, really, to shift that culture. Yeah.
So in staying in the kind of like looking back, reflecting phase that we're in, on the flip side, when you look back, is there a mistake that happened in your career somewhere along the lines that still maybe makes your cheeks burn a little bit?
I think in my early days, you know, in our 20s, I mean, I'll speak personally, I'm not going to say everybody's like this, but certainly in my 20s, there was quite a good balance between socializing and work. You know, there was quite a lot of time spent on Greek Street, etc. And at times it can be really hard to get the balance right between friends and more and work colleagues. And particularly in a role like HR, because we know stuff. You know, we're expected to be confidants and counsellors, but we also want to make friends with people, and that can be a real challenge. So I think a couple of times I probably overstepped and perhaps made friends with the wrong people in my youthful exuberance to be out and about and doing what young people do in Leeds. And I think there was a couple of times where I'm not saying I broke confidence, because I definitely didn't, but coming into a formal meeting when somebody across the table with you were drinking under the table a week ago, that's difficult.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few I look back and I think, I shouldn't have done that.
Yikesy moments.
Yeah, it's just hard, you know, to be friends with somebody who you then might have to put at risk of redundancy, for example. It's just difficult. And I think I hadn't done it for long enough to know that was a risky area. I didn't see it coming, I suppose. So it's one of those things that I look back and you know, you take that learning with you, don't you, as you go through roles.
Of course.
But yeah, I think in your 20s that's really hard to accept.
Yeah. So thinking like more broadly about your career, was there a moment for you where you were like, "Oof, I have made it. This is me and I'm flying." Like that kind of power move where it all came together for you?
Yeah, I think Evershed was really seminal for me because I got all that HR grounding, and I left at a point where I'd been given the responsibility to do a massive national project, which was to set up the first shared services function in Birmingham. So it was a massive restructure. And Caroline, who I'd mentioned before, with me and a team of other quite young HR people, we were given the responsibility to do it. And that kind of stays in my mind as one of the most one of the projects I'm most proud of, I guess, in my career. But I left at the end of that and I went traveling because I got to about 30 and everybody was settling down and I wasn't. And I just thought, sod it, I'm going to go and see the world. So I got a big payoff as part of that project, left the business and went away. And when I came back, I was a bit like, well, what do I do now? And I would scrat around for any job I could find. But eventually I found a really good job. And that was when I joined Santander. And it was a different culture. It was a different industry. So into finance, retail banking and telephone call centers, it was completely different. But I think because I was that bit older, I was early 30s by then, I kind of had the confidence that I know my stuff. I've got that kind of solid foundation and I can now take it where I want and apply it where I want. And I think I got kind of professional confidence at that point. On my return from going and doing whatever I wanted to do travel wise, and then I came back into a really good role quite quickly. And I think that for me just felt like, whoa, whoosh, we're going now. And then what followed was 2 successive promotions after that took me up to director level. So it was almost like I needed that hiatus to then be able to shoot forward after Santander. So I think that kind of, for me, felt the point where I was actually doing it well. Yeah.
So it all sounds very glorious so far. I'm just wondering, like, was there a job that you shouldn't have taken that you took, that you look back on and thought, oh, that was never a good fit for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I went into banking, I took a job in another organisation who I'm not going to mention. And it was the worst culture fit I've ever felt. And it's one of those, people talk, I think now, obviously, I talk about it quite knowledgeably, having worked as a consultant for lots of other cultures. I have more of an insight. But at this point in time, I think I'd probably worked in 4 or 5 companies for not very long each. So I took the job, which on the face of it seemed to be a good fit for my skills. But the culture was just absolutely not at all where I'd want it to be. I'll give you 2 examples. One was there was an entire department who wore slippers at work because it made them feel like they were at home.
Wow.
I'll just leave that with you. The second one was, having come from a law firm, you do things right, and if you inadvertently sent an email to the wrong person, it would be a significant issue. It would be, a detailed conversation. And at this particular organization, somebody would repeatedly send an email to the entire 1,000 head organization, including the managing director. Has anyone seen my long arm stapler?
Oh dear.
And I would look around at colleagues and go, oh my God, have you seen that guy? He's just sent that guy. A poor guy, he must be so embarrassed. And they would be looking at me like, what? What's your problem? Like that was normal. There were just so many things. I just thought I felt like I was an alien who'd landed on a different planet. And I'd never had that feeling before. People had always responded well to my sort of get up and go approach, but it just didn't. It wasn't right at all. So I left very, very quickly.
Oh, that's very good.
And I think, useful lesson to think about the culture.
Really important. Really important. And also, like, how wise of you that you knew to get out fast. That you.
I'm really glad. Yeah,
that you got out fast.
Well, I was lucky actually because I had been offered 2 jobs on the same day, and I'd taken that one. And then I went back to the recruiter who I'd been working with on the other one. And they said, oh, actually, it's interesting because they took an internal candidate when you turned them down and it hasn't worked out. So that job's available again. Would you like it? So it was one of those little quirk of fates that actually I ended up back where I would have been, just with a 6-month sojourn in a strange part of Yorkshire.
With lots of long arm staplers.
Lots. Yeah.
Slippers. So in a similar vein then, were there jobs that you didn't get that you wish, you know, those like, oh, if only, is there any in that category for you?
I don't know that there is really. There's a few that I got to last interview with that's quite funny, and a couple of them I actually went on to work with them as a consultant, so I saw the organization again as an external. I think I'm quite fatalistic about it. If it's meant to be, it'll come together. Yeah, I can't really think of any that really sting. You know, you think, damn, that was my job. I kind of make the best of whatever I've got, but I am quite quick to move. You know, I would never have stayed anywhere more than about the 2.5 year mark. I'm looking, you know, I'm not, I was always very much more of a project style person. So I think if I'd felt I'd missed out on something, I'd probably just have another go at it. You know, I did like universities. I always thought I would have been a good match there. And I got to second interview twice for HR business partner roles at the universities in Leeds, each of them. And I've done some work with universities since, and I probably wouldn't have done well there, but at the time I thought I would. So you just kind of, yeah, no, I think I'm quite
unknown, isn't there?
Quite sanguine about it. Yeah.
So thinking about people who are embarking on a HR career, maybe starting out, what advice would you give to them in the context that we're living in now as well?
Yeah, I think when I started, as I said, it was mid-90s, it was quite, I think HR and the world of work was very formal, much more formal than it is now. And certainly HR was viewed as a bit of a dark art, and we were kept behind sliding doors and away from the public, shielded from the light in case our faces melt in the sunshine. And I think with that in mind, my number one bit of advice would be sit with the business. Do not let them put you. I spent a year sitting in a cupboard without windows because they didn't want HR to be on the main floor. They thought it was too confidential. I would fight that tooth and nail. And I think now so many roles are either home-based or hybrid. I think you can come up with a way of working, of doing the sensitive stuff at home and everything else out and about. And I think a quarter of your week should be spent with the business, talking to the business, listening to the business. That would be my number one.
So it might seem bleeding obvious to you and me, and given this is your podcast, but tell your listeners, where are you now in your career? What's going on? What are you doing now in your career?
Well, I did a bit of a change at the end of the year, and I am back kind of doing my own thing. And I am focusing on two areas. One is kind of sharing what I've learned with businesses. And that is always really critical to me, that I understand what the world of business feels like. I think it'd be very easy, can't it, to sit at home and think, oh, well, I've done it for 25 years, but it's changing all the time. So I think it's really important to be connected to that. So I work with businesses. Often they're small, they might be owner managed, they might be charities. Arts and charities are kind of my love zone in terms of businesses. But anything they want, you know, it's, should we do this? I've got this case, or can you have a look at our policies, processes, system, team, whatever it might be. So all of that. And then the second part that I do is coach HR people. So a bit like kind of the conversation we're having and I'm having with other people on the podcast, is trying to support HR people either at the start of their career, or if they're changing career, or if they're in a standalone role, which is really common in small businesses, just so they've got that kind of voice of reason sat next to them saying, yeah, that is what you should do. Absolutely, that's the right thing to do. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So kind of HR consultancy and HR coaching. That's the vibe at the moment, but who knows where it might go.
And what about big dreams for the future?
Yeah, I think I'm open to other things as they come up. The only thing that I do know is that I never want to be employed again.
Ever.
I think I'm pretty much unemployable. But the lightness and the opportunity to do different things, to me, is just, I'm just too much of a project person. The variety is just too tempting. I'm looking at things like online training courses, whether that's something to go into. And I think it's interesting to see how kind of the social media and online realm is shifting, and how people are accessing work. And I think for me, the one thing that I've seen in the last few months particularly is people coming to talk to me and contacting me who want to take responsibility for their own careers and their own personal development. And I think that's very much kind of the moment. I think the new generation of people coming through, they're not waiting for their employer to send them on a penner out placement course to learn. They're buying, Brené Brown and other brilliant books and doing it themselves. So that's kind of the vibe that I'm picking up and want to tap into. And I think the kind of work that I do as a coach really builds on that. So it's kind of about self-development and also developing myself. I think there's pleasure in that, isn't there? And then sharing that kind of journey. So who knows? I'm open.
Well, exciting. Final question. How was it being interviewed for your own podcast?
It was slightly less comfortable than I thought it would be. It's much easier for me on the other side. It's a bit like, I'm the worst delegate in a training course.
I don't believe that.
But I think also it's made me ponder about the questions that I ask. And it is interesting, isn't it? Thinking why you do things and sort of connecting the dots.
And taking the time out to pause long enough to be able to do that reflection, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think you've been a natural, and it has been a joy to interview you for your HR career. And this is us coming to a close. Thank you for asking me to role reversal with you. It's been a joy.
Thank you very much for your time, Jen. Good. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Check us out on the next one. Bye.